What's an A player? It's someone who possesses the attitude of curiosity, connection, and total commitment to the vision. The work we do with our clients helps them both be A players and fill their organization with A players. This is a segment of the Naked Leadership Podcast where you will get to know the A players of our team and take new ground. You'll get to see firsthand their brilliance, talent, and commitment as we talk in areas of their expertise. Hey all, this is Chad. Today I get to sit down with Mark Edwards, Associate Partner at Take New Ground. Mark has an insane history and rap sheet when it comes to finance and governance for organizations. If you want to know anything about raising money, finding board members, or strategic exits, Mark is your man. In this episode, Mark and I chat about the hot issue of the Silicon Valley bank run. Mark talks about this from a practical standpoint. He is uniquely aware of the founder's perspective and risk when it comes to storing money. Mark makes it clear that for founders caught in the SVB crisis, this is actually a governance issue. If you don't know what I mean, stay tuned, he explains it all. At the end of the conversation, he also outlines exactly the action he would take now as a founder when it comes to banking and storing funds. Let's dive in. Mark, my friend, how are you?
Great, Chad. Good to see you again, and always good to be with you.
Yeah, we had a happen chance meeting in Austin last week, which was fun.
Yeah, that was kind of a surprise. It was good. Good to be here. Kind of crazy time at South by Southwest.
It was a crazy time. Well, I mean, even the topic that we're going to talk about right now, Silicon Valley Bank, all of that, all that went down right as everybody was coming in for South by Southwest. I was there supporting one of our clients in some marketing efforts and an activation that she created. And you were out there on taking meetings, and anyway, it was fun to run into you. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it was interesting because I had thought the South by Southwest would be somewhat dominated by AI and Chat GPT and what's going on, and instead this banking crisis kind of took over and stole the narrative from what I think should have been a very creative, environment. And maybe we'll have another conversation sometime about generative AI and what generative AI means for everyone, because it does mean something to everyone. But it got swamped, and I think it's kind of a shame it got swamped. But it got swamped, and that's the real world. And so, let's talk about the real world, because that's where we live.
Yeah. So when you and I were brainstorming ideas of what we could talk about that would be meaningful for our audience, I was just asking you because it was fresh on my mind, and we had this conversation in Austin, and I asked, what is it about Silicon Valley Bank that we could talk about that would be meaningful for the founders and the leaders that listen to the Naked Leadership Podcast? And you talked about, you said something that really surprised me. You said this whole situation, especially for the individual businesses, is a governance issue, and that caught my attention. And I thought, well, what in the world are you talking about, Mark? Those seem like different, financing and governance. Those seem like, obviously they're connected, but they seem like different topics. I just want to start there. Why did you respond that this, for most of these startups or founders, that this was a governance issue?
Well, as we've talked before, and anyone who's heard us chat knows that the three pillars of an organization are operations. What are you actually doing in the company? Ownership, who owns a company, and then the least that one which gets the least attention, which is governance, and governance being that element that sits between ownership and operations. And what struck me with SVB, Signature, and in general, this banking crisis is a crisis of governance. And really, it's a lack of governance. Both a lack of governance in these particular banks that have been hit heavily. But it also highlights areas that governance could be strengthened in companies, portfolio companies. When I say portfolio companies that have assets in banks, which is pretty much every company. I mean, there's a few, I guess, run on cash, but pretty much every company has assets in banks. And so let's kind of look at it that way. And I mean, let's start very briefly with lack of governance at key banks like Signature and SVB. In this case, as in many public companies, the operations, the executives tend to have most of the control, often stack the board, which is governance.
Yep.
And really, because, shareholding is very decentralized, you don't have many shareholders have much, most shareholders have a low percentage equity. So typically, your shareholders are not having a lot of say. It's normally the management that's stacking the board, and that's led to this lack of governance. And so we see that then that, what does governance provide? Well, it provides a check and balance. It provides a sounding board. It provides a way to really strengthen the level of conversation occurring inside the company, both with the executives who run the company and the representatives of the shareholders who are the directors. And when you see big failures like this, typically it comes down to lack of governance, meaning that the directors or representatives of the owners are not really not doing their job. And that's because they're not the right people, or they've been disempowered in some way. And so that's when we see these big surprises come. When you have strong governance, you don't get surprises. So there's been this lack of governance. Now, that's what's happened at the banks, and that's very dramatic. But why? I guess the question is, why and how does that play into the companies? Because most of the companies we're talking to here are, they're going to be smaller, founder-led. They're not banks, right? So
yeah, early stage companies.
Yeah, and so when you think about governance, an early stage company, which most don't, to be honest, you tend to think about, do we have plans in place? Do we have plans? And typically those plans are for growth, strategic plans, but also they can be plans around disaster recovery. What happens if things go badly? And one of the elements that is now being considered are treasury management plans, meaning you've got money, what are you going to do with that? Where's a safe place to put it? And so this typically hasn't been on the agenda, but now it's coming to the fore. Companies are thinking about, where do I put my money? How do I manage my money? And that is part of a treasury management plan that, again, typically running a business, you're not going to think about that. But when you're representing the shareholders, you are going to think about that. And if we just got bounced back to the banks, while the depositors in the banks have been taken care of, the shareholders in these banks have been completely wiped out, which meant that there's been a huge failure in governance, because the whole point of having a board is to look after the interests of shareholders. And those interests have been burned to the ground, which means that job hasn't been done. So if we use this as an example, then why should we have a board? It's to take care of the interests of shareholders.
Yeah. Is there? I know this is a little off topic, and this is out of the blue. And if you don't have any thoughts you want to share on it, I totally understand. Do you have any reaction to the fact that a lot of the principals sold all their shares before the collapse?
I'd say watch out. There's going to be some investigations coming. Because when you start when you see that timing of shares being sold, that is that's a real red flag. And I used to be an officer at a public company, and quite frankly, we had windows in which to sell shares. And if we had material information, then we absolutely did not sell shares with material insider information. And there was very significant consequences to actually doing that. And so I would say that those individuals probably getting representation right now, because that is a risky thing to be doing. And better. Look, your CFO, and compliance officers in a bank, CFO in a public company, they are going to, they know what the rules are around when you can and cannot sell. And definitely knowing the shakiness of their balance sheet. That was a very concerning move. And having been in that role myself, I know that you think once, you think twice, and the thing we was said to ourselves when I was at QLogic was, before we made a trade, were we okay with the full details of that trade, being announced on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, going fully public? And the answer is, yeah. If you're good with that, then
then it's a good trade.
Then it's a good trade. But if you're doing that on insider information or non-public information, which I don't know for a fact they were, but it's a bit smelly. Then you're really making very short-term decisions.
Yeah. Thanks for entertaining that question. I'm just it's so curious to me, and as those listening can probably tell, my level of knowledge in this is just enough to get me in trouble in a conversation. So I love hearing your perspective on those things. A little bit off topic, but I also wanted to point people back to the last episode that you and I did together, which was all about boards, right? So that information, and we had no idea what was coming with SVB, but that conversation really sets a great foundational knowledge for this conversation. So if you haven't heard that, really encourage you to go back and listen, because there's a lot of meaningful information around governance in that conversation. So Mark, you talked about having a plan in place. Now, we all know that we can't have a plan for everything.
Yeah.
It would be impossible. So talking to very stretched and hard driving founders that have a million moving pieces that they're taking that they're paying attention to, where would you start to make these plans? Like, what would you be paying close attention to on the finance side or the governance side to make plans in order to make sure that you're covered, at least in as many places that you can? Life is not fair. It's what you negotiate. Let me say that one more time. Life is not fair. It's what you negotiate. Now, that's an interesting thought. If that's true, it means that everything you have in life right now, the possessions, the relationships, the fitness, the mindset, are all a product of your negotiations with others and yourself. And if that's true, wouldn't you want to be very clear on how you negotiate? What's effective and what's ineffective? What your strengths are and what your blind spots are? It is, after all, producing all the results in your life. So here's the deal. We put together a 15-question quiz that you can take in 5 minutes or less and find out exactly what your negotiation style is. The results of this quiz will give you insight into your strengths and blind spots in negotiation. It will also give you insight in how you can accentuate those strengths or compensate for the blind spots. Think for just 1 second with me all of the conversations you're having in your life. Think about compensation or advancement conversations with people on your team, discussing financial decisions with a partner, or just getting your kids to get their damn shoes on so that you can leave the house. All of these conversations are negotiations. This simple yet powerful tool has the potential to reinvent the way you get what you want in every aspect of life. Go to negotiation.takenewground.com right now, or click the link in the description of this episode and find out what negotiation style you embody. You can thank us later. Now back to the show.
Well, the first thing is, as a founder or CEO, it's recognizing you don't know everything. Now, you know a lot about your business, you know a lot about your market, your product market fit, operations, how you get the business done, and that's why you're in that role. But there are things you don't know, and that that sort of segment, that what we call that DK, right? You don't know what you don't know. The more aware you're of that, the more likely you are to reach out to other resource. And in this case, the resource we recommend having is in fact a board of directors, and that board, would be a group of people you've picked for their knowledge, their experience, and networks and resources they can bring to the table that go beyond what you and your executive team and management team have. So what I would say is that is going to come up in the conversation if you've constituted a board and you have a board and you're actively using the board, and that just doesn't mean board meetings, but in addition to board meetings, be able to reach out when at other times. If you've got that board in place and it is functioning, then these kind of conversations are going to come up, because the areas of vulnerability for your company would be something that is pretty obvious. So back earlier in my career, I sold high-end computer systems, and we sold into businesses that were, their entire business was running a computer system. Think about airline reservations or car reservations. So I had clients like Hertz and Amadeus, and for example, Hertz, their data center is based in Oklahoma City. So back in the 90s, when there was the Oklahoma City bombing, that really made Hertz look at, hey, our whole business is going to go down if we only have one data center. So they implemented a second data center and mirrored it, which was a huge investment at the time because the technologies were very embryonic for mirroring data in real time. Large amounts of data in real time back in the 90s. But it was a reflection to an incident. There was an incident, terrorist bombing in Oklahoma City. So, they realized, oh my goodness, if that had been closer to our data center, we could have gone down. Now, did they know that before? No, but then what happened was a lot of companies after that then started putting in disaster recovery plans. What happens if that proverbial 747 goes through the roof? What is it we're going to do? How are we going to keep this business running? And that sort of spawned that whole business continuity practice and everything that came after that. So again, I think the best way to do that is to constitute a board. And then the board, if you've got the right people on the board, they develop not just they will come with some understanding of the industry. However, they're going to develop a deeper understanding as you, the founder, the executive in charge, are explaining what you do. Their questions are going to be the ones that you're going to need to respond to. If you've got the right board, they're going to ask the right questions, and they're going to be about. So in the same way that Oklahoma City bombing back in the 90s created a whole business continuity practice, and every board of directors had to ask their team, okay, what's your disaster recovery plan right now? In the same way, starting this month, every board saying, what's your treasury management plan? How are you going to, So these are a little bit about showing the barn door after the horse is bolted. So how do you get ahead of that? Well, you get ahead of that by having the right board, the people who are going to challenge you as a CEO, and founder and CEO. They're going to challenge you, and that's really what you want to look for. You don't want yes men and women on the board. You want people who are going to challenge you, and they're going to take you into that DK, that area that you don't know about. Their experience is going to lead them into that and ask you questions that you won't be able to answer. And that's where the gold is.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So what if I could just throw back to you what I'm hearing you say in my language? Because, I was taken by surprise to your response when I asked you about SBV. And now I'm understanding what I hear you saying is that if you have an effective board in place, they are going to identify blind spots for you.
Yes.
and they're going to illuminate those, and then those become a topic of conversation and action, and you'll take action that you didn't even know needed to be taken because you had an effective board of governance in place.
Yeah, I would add to that blind spots and areas of risk, because ultimately that's what we're talking about is risk
Yeah.
remediation. And what they're going to do is they're going to challenge you to come up with a plan to offset the high those risks which are most likely going to damage shareholder value. I'd put you out of business, or just cause these significant losses in the business. So that's why we can't say exactly what it is, but and it may be areas that you're aware of, but you haven't prioritized. So it's not
Right on.
always in the DKDK. It could be, hey, I'm aware of it, but it's not a priority. The board may say, hold on, hang on, this is a priority. These are reasons it's a priority. And as the shareholder representatives, we believe it's a priority. And ultimately,
Yeah.
that is why you want a powerful board, because, a board that is empowered, an empowered board that's been empowered by shareholders. Now, here's where it gets interesting. As the founder, you may be the largest shareholder, and you say, well, why do I need that? Well, because, again, it comes back to, do you know everything? Or, are you open to bring in resource that may have experiences that you don't have, may have knowledge that you don't have. And if that's the case, then I would strongly encourage you to look at forming a board to look after your own interests, because frankly, when you're running a business, you're not necessarily best placed to look after your own interests.
Yes. Yeah. I agree totally. And if you're listening to this and you're wondering, well, Mark, when should I consider forming a board? Please go back to that last episode that we did together, and we talked specifically about that. I'm not going to dive into that now because I want to stay focused on this topic. But there's really great information in that conversation about when you should form a board, how you form a board, how do you make sure that it's effective and empowered. It's a really rich conversation. I've listened back to it a couple of times just for my own sake, my own understanding. So, Mark, what do you think going forward after this crisis? What do you think is fundamentally going to change about the way people store their money?
Well, fundamentally, people are going to store it in multiple places. So it's not just going to be in one bank. And we've certainly done that with some of the companies we work with, where we had all the funds in one bank and now it's spread across multiple banks. We're going to pay attention to putting a treasury management plan in place. I mean, in fact, later on this afternoon, I have a call with the treasury management department of a bank for one of the companies that we're involved in. And so I would say that multiple places, so multiple banks. I think it's also going to put a spotlight back on digital currencies, crypto, which has been hammered pretty hard and got really kicked to the curb. So I do think we're going to see alternate forms of stores of wealth, and so it won't just be fiat currency, because this is a big sort of shock to really to the fiat currency system, and while that's what we have, so I think there'll be number one, decentralization, multiple accounts, and then number two is going to be looking at alternative forms of stores of wealth, which is primarily digital currency, because I don't think precious metals make a lot of sense to many people. And I mean, it does to some people, but generally to businesses not. So I think it will signal a resurgence of selected crypto.
Yeah. Will there be an increase in transparency of the rate of leverage that financial institutions are instituting, or are people going to be paying closer attention to that, do you think?
Well, they may do for a while, but then that's pretty hard to look at. And that's really pertinent to shareholders of the banks, because they're the ones who really get hurt. I mean, what the government's shown is that, and what not just the US government, every government shown is they're not going to let the depositors down. So I don't think from a depositor viewpoint, it's going to make a huge difference. Other than we're all cautious around that. But I think in terms of how the banks manage their balance sheet, that's going to be something that the investors are going to be extremely aware of, and most people are going to be pretty concerned about investing in bank stocks for a while.
So let's just say you're a founder in an early stage, maybe you're round A or something like that. And, it's so interesting. I'll just say this really quick. That Friday morning, I got 2 emergency calls from my clients that are founders of both tech companies. Mm-hmm. And just feeling devastated in that moment. And it was early. There wasn't a lot of information at the time. They didn't know exactly, the 250,000 or whatever it was really what was the only thing that they thought was going to be guaranteed. Anyway, it was an interesting experience, and it really put me in the place of these founders. And I started asking the question, if I'm a founder, what do I learn from this? What do I take away from it? And I think, we've already highlighted some of them, but at the end of this conversation, I want to punctuate some of those. Mark, as given you get to take your experience with you, you're founding again, which you are, and you're in a certain round of raising money and operations and growing this thing, and you've got so much to consider. What is it that you take away from this experience?
Create options is number one thing for me, because that Friday morning, I was also very nervous. I'm running a company. We raised $1 million. We had $1 million in the bank, and the bank it was in, which was not either of these 2 banks, but another one that was getting hit pretty hard at that time. I was very nervous. I mean, I was, feeling literally sick to my stomach. And fortunately, I'd already begun the process of opening another bank account about a month before, because it does take time to open other bank accounts. So I had actually only got the account number and routing number for the new account that Friday morning, which was very fortunate, and I was able to transfer out the bulk of the cash into another bank. Before the bank that we had the money in, which is the one that's still under a lot of pressure right now, without naming it. So I would say that create options, which right now means open other bank accounts, and it's not always straightforward to open other bank accounts, especially when you're venture backed, because often the bank is looking through to who are the beneficial owners of the company. They want all sorts of information on them, and VCs don't like offering that up. So you just got to have frank conversation with your investors if you're VC backed, that this is what we need from you. So it's really create options for yourself. Learn from what's happened. Learn from the misfortunes of others. Now, in this case, everyone's going to be okay, but that's not necessarily always going to be won't always be the case.
Right. Makes sense. Anything else you want to share on this topic? Specifically, I know you really wanted to make sure that the idea of governance, and brilliantly so, I think, to make it a useful conversation rather than just a speculative conversation about banking. You really wanted to make sure we drove home this idea of governance and the importance there. Is there anything in final that you want to say about that?
Well, I know you plugged the previous podcast we did on governance. The one thing I would say out of it is, either as a founder and CEO, if you don't have a board, you can either architect that board yourself or wait and an investor will do it for you. And my I'm the advocate for the founder and the CEO and the executive team. So as my one plug as the advocacy for the founders and CEOs is architect the board in light of the vision and where you want to go, in conjunction with the investors. Or if you get an institutional investor like a VC, they're going to do it and it'll be done the way they want to do it, which may not be exactly the way you want to do it. So I suggest take action as opposed to wait and get it implemented, regardless of how you see it should be done.
Take it from an experienced board member, investor. I'm sure you've been in all of those situations. And Mark, you've shared with me, you haven't always been on the interested side of the founder, so you've seen the other side of it.
Yeah. Look, I'm a full venture capitalist, so 9 times out of 10, I was the one forming the board, and you can weight the board towards yourself if you're forming it as an investor, versus it being more balanced. So that's, because as the old saying goes, he who has the gold makes the rules. And that's absolutely the case. So if you wait until you're bringing investment in to form a board, you're going to get what's served up to you, versus taking control.
Yeah. Mark, you have such a unique voice on this podcast and in this conversation, and I'm so appreciative of it. I learn so much every time you're on. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Chad, it's always a pleasure. Great to talk to you, brother.
All right, man. Bye-bye, everybody. Well, my friends, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Naked Leadership Podcast. As a heads up, every Friday we post a Cliff Notes version of that week's conversation with all the highlights in under 5 minutes. Check that out for a quick and powerful reminder of the principles discussed. I hope this conversation has been valuable to you. If it has, the greatest compliment you could pay us is sharing it with somebody who could use it. Thanks so much for listening, and until next week, bye-bye, everybody.